During their release periods, a bunch of games of recent memory have been put into awkward spots through their creators' business practices or just bad distribution ideas, amongst some other things. Games like Titanfall 2 and Anthem from EA were kneecapped from the starting gate due to their overlords' bizarre ideas and, for better or worse, hurt their impact on the market. However, it is the rare occasion that a game gets put out into the public where it's put on the spot simply through build-up within the franchise itself. No game was going to have a good time being the prequel to the famously insane series of Kingdom Hearts, and today we're going to talk about it through Birth by Sleep. Kingdom Hearts as a series has such a sporadic release schedule throughout its existence that it allows some of its games to actually break tradition and do some crazy things to the expected formula of the hack-and-slash veteran. Rather than just sticking with a simple map screen, level-based journey through hack-and-slash levels looking for the people and the secret, this time Birth by Sleep does that, but frames it around 3 characters instead of just 1. Yeah, for some reason, Birth by Sleep wanted to be connected to one of the most butchered releases in video game history, and that is Sonic 2006. Birth by Sleep features the formula of having 3 separate stories play out featuring each character's point of view as they go through an interconnected journey with a final episode at the end of it all. It was an odd change since the comparison to the lowest of Sonic's days is plainly obvious for anyone in the know, but that doesn't mean it's inherently a bad idea. The chance to offer a well-rounded take on a typical hack-and-slash story had the chance to do some interesting things through POV changes, since that shifts the context between each character's journey even though they're all going to the same places. The issue comes in that not enough work was done to make the best use of this 3-character formula, as things barely change. And only the most obvious of plot points involving each character gets any timeline branches, such as Terra's corruption and Ventus going into his inevitable coma. Other than these very specific moments, each character is doing the same thing, and in scenes with all 3 characters at once on screen, context only barely changes depending on who's talking. It was an ambitious idea, but it just failed to hit the mark. Another issue with the story is that it lacks any consistency in plot progression, which becomes a problem when you show up to a new world as one of the characters, and you have no idea which part of that world's story the character is playing. It could be the beginning, the middle, or the end. You really have no idea. Depending on which character left the training ground first, it should have been the first character playing all the beginning parts of the story and not flipping around randomly between the 3 periods whenever the game just feels like it. It makes following along with the plot confusing as hell, since you have no idea how the events happening on screen fit in with the other parts until later on when you finally find the context halfway through the level. It's a baffling thing to see since the level requirements shouldn't change between all the characters, so they should be visiting each world at the same time. So, for example, Ventus should be the one doing all the middle part, not flipping around between everyone else just because the creator doesn't know what the hell they're doing. And speaking of the plot, what makes it even harder to get immersed in this game is that the events of it aren't actually all that interesting. Kingdom Hearts as a series is completely defined by the characters rather than the plot points, since everything is experienced through the actions of the protagonists, rather than the events themselves in the game. So, if the Kingdom Hearts game goes with a boring character, then it's really just not going to work. It was going to be a hard day for any game to try and prequelize the Kingdom Hearts series, but even so, Birth by Sleep should have been just trying harder. Aqua, Ventus, and Terra are billed to be these original Keyblade Masters that ended up being lost during the further games in the series, and they're pretty important to the overarching plot of the entire franchise. And Square Enix really should have had them making the decisions that led to the original game. But it seems that the characters are just falling ass first into predestined fuck-ups. The worst of the pack was Aqua, which I bet on the second I saw her character on the selection screen. She's the magic user of the 3, which is pretty bullshit or really hard to master in a Kingdom Hearts game, since her combat abilities are automatically taking a hit. since the magic runs on resources that run out eventually, making her vulnerable even compared to Ventus, who is the Mario-style all-rounder. He's quicker, more nimble, and seems to have more combo ability. Not really inherently good at any one option, it ends up giving the player the ability to bend him easier to suit their needs, and then there's just Terra, who is the strength character and therefore easiest to play, since he's got the stats and is just an all-round tank. While the plot seems predestined to happen because all the characters are bad at doing the right thing, at the very least, the plot is livened up somewhat by their character traits. Aqua is sent out on the mission of Birth by Sleep as the cleanup girl. She was the one who initially won the right to be a Keyblade Master and was given the responsibility from their master to deal with the upcoming problem. And when she starts going around to the other worlds, it really just shows that she's only committed to doing the cleaning up. She barely interacts with the world she goes to, and more often than not, she's just trying to sniff out the trail of Ventus and Terra. She sounds more robotic than the other characters of the game and doesn't really seem to think about the things happening around her or making informed opinions, and simply falls back on reciting a list of obvious things that are around her in place of having any actual intellectual conversation with anyone that she meets. She's not the dumbest character by a long shot in all the games, but failing to care about the situation she finds herself in makes her journey very boring, since nothing bad seems to happen to her at all, and even if it did, she doesn't give a shit. The villains that she finds to fight are incompetent or don't care about her existence at all. Ventus gets a bit better off since he's easier to play as and gets some easier boss fights. His plot is that he's some sort of chosen vessel to release this ultimate weapon that the game is just based around. Ventus, by the way, is completely naive since their master didn't integrate him all the way into the group, and his previous circumstances gave him attachment issues. And moreover, he just didn't explain anything about why Ventus was important, or why he would have been getting dicked over by the forces of evil so many years ago. Ventus is kind of like the original Naruto, except somehow more thoughtless. The very second that Terra takes off for whatever the hell he wants to do, Ventus follows him in order to try and, power of friendship, convince him to come back to the Master and to their group. Later on, Ventus's powers are sapped through a convoluted plot by Xehanort in order to get that ultimate weapon. His journey is more interesting since Ventus is most important to the plot of the game, but his complete idiocy does make it hard to not facepalm at every single decision that he decides to make. And then there's Terra, who wins by default. Terra is the Anakin Skywalker of Kingdom Hearts. Early on, Terra gets seduced by the dark side and he has to fight against those powers and try to do the things the right way in spite of himself making a bunch of terrible, idiotic frickin' choices. He falls into the clutches of Xehanort and totally screws himself in the end, and unwittingly becomes a pawn of the dark side. His journey is defined solely by Terra not having a single thought in his head, and he just does everything that anybody he meets asks him to do, and since he keeps running into evil characters, he ends up turning to the dark side through just pure stupidity. Not exactly the Anakin journey, but it's pretty damn close. Terra is the one who rebels from the Master after losing at the exam to Aqua, and then a bunch of bullshit happens while he's out trying to clear his mind. While most of the characters make bad choices that constantly kept pushing all three down the path to their predestined failure at the hands of Xehanort, I ended up placing most of the blame for this collective facepalm on Ericus, who really should have known better. He's presented as this typical all-wise leader who has all the answers. He's the trainer of the chosen ones, and yet completely failed to handle the maturing of Ventus and Terra at the very least. He failed to make Ventus understand his position as the vessel of the Chi Blade, and Terra's burgeoning connection to the dark side, and on top of all this, Xehanort's very obvious evilness. The game is not even 5 minutes in, and Xehanort is directly interfering with the Mark of Mastery exam by summoning enemies to fight Aqua and Terra, and yet Grandmaster Ericus has no idea how that happened. Xehanort, after the exam, has a meeting with Vanitas inside of the Keyblade Master's hall to discuss their diabolical plan 4 minutes after the exam ended and pretty much everyone was still there. This evil plan really should never have gotten off the ground due to how out in the open it was. And yet everyone and their mom missed every tell. To keep this part short, Vanitas exists as the dark half of Ventus after Xehanort snatched the darkness in his heart and forged it into Vanitas in order to have an enslaved pawn become the holder of the Chi-Blade. That kinda fucked up in the end since some plot points fell through and he had to edit the plan. So since that didn't happen right, Xehanort fell back to his other plan and started schmoozing and coercing Terra, since he was the one falling to darkness, and then continued on his path of screw-ups until he fell so hard that by the end of the game, Terra had become the perfect vessel for Xehanort to transfer his consciousness into and gain enough life force to continue his plan into the future inside of Terra's body. Basically, the Orochimaru plot, which makes Terra the tragic story in all of this since he ends up getting trapped in his own body for the foreseeable future. Aqua tries to save Terra but isn't able to overcome the challenge and ends up getting tossed into the abyss, while Ventus arguably got off the easiest by being trapped in a magical coma for eternity in the safekeeping of the hidden training grounds. Birth by Sleep is the prequel game to the rest of the series, so it shouldn't have been too surprising that the 3 characters introduced in this game all got terrible endings that'll scar them forever, if they manage to even have one after this. At least the Chi-Blade was broken by Ventus, and Xehanort will have to wait a long time to have another shot at his master plan of seeing through the Keyblade War. Hopefully long enough for Sora and Riku to stop him for realsies. But with the game over, we can talk about how the game takes its own spin on the usual hack and slash formula. Each game puts their own spin on it and adds some bells and whistles at the very least. This one was after Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2, so this was getting a bit late into the release history, and while it's not as refined as what Kingdom Hearts 2 did, it does well enough to maintain that sort of madcap fun that the game had in mind. The combos are useful and cover enough ground to make the usual sword swinging viable, and the game has the usual amount of options available for the player to build their own combat style. Upgrades are available in a board game that Birth by Sleep provides for the player, and it is a pretty cut down Mario Party clone that forgoes a lot of features and screwing with the players that other party games have in mind, so this minigame feels pretty slow, boring, and stodgy at best. And the rewards are not worth it to pour a lot of time into playing this additional mode. I did play a couple of times before I gave up on the whole concept out of sheer boredom. This is the game that introduced the shot lock into the Kingdom Hearts formula, which was a good idea, since it gives the player a few seconds of FPS aiming to lock onto targets, and then launch this big AoE attack at the locked on enemies to get in some free hits. It fits in really well to the combat formula, and the lengthy countdown that it has makes it a nice combat feature without it ending up getting in the way of combat or being a constant requirement for the harder fights. Other than that, it's pretty standard Kingdom Hearts combat. You hit things with a stick, you build up your combos, hope some of your additional combo buffs gets added into the stack, and try to dodge everything as best you can. Further along, you get the usual sword upgrades and can enjoy the simplicity of killing some more iconic Disney characters with your magical stick. The movies that Birth by Sleep chose to feature are thankfully totally brand new to the series, with movies like Cinderella, Snow White, and the most unique one being Lilo and Stitch for some reason. I'm glad that one showed up on the list because for all the good that Disney's earliest movies did, the actual stories in them were pretty boring, in spite of how glad I was that the usual cadre of Kingdom Hearts worlds didn't show up for another round. I'll take the boring part of Lilo and Stitch any day over seeing Agrabah for a 4th time. They are pretty great levels as per usual. You run around, enjoy seeing the movies play out, kill the main villain, and off you trot to whatever Square Enix has intended next. Birth by Sleep definitely wasn't my favorite Kingdom Hearts game since the story just wasn't as good as other entries in the series. I wasn't that interested in the characters, I thought they were pretty two-dimensional. In the effort for Square Enix to somehow build a plausible prequel out of this convoluted series halfway through the release history, they really did go for some laughable plot points. Xehanort's obvious evilness, Ericus's inability to pick up on any clues even from his own students screwing up, and the constant bad decisions and incredible stupidity of the main characters makes watching a lot of the cutscenes a moderate annoyance at best, due to how many times your hand will be covering your face. The hack and slash combat is great as always, and the adaptation of the Disney levels are the quality that you know from the franchise, with all new places to go and people to see, making it all the better as per the usual. But again, the actual Disney levels have very little to do with the plot progression of the actual game, so even though the levels are fun as hell, not much can be done to shield Birth by Sleep from its own bad writing. Introducing this all-new and never-seen-before plot points and timeline events with this game, and yet most of it is just so tiresome. This is not helped by Square Enix's decision to go through the timeline 3 times, which doesn't lead to a lot of contextual epiphanies with the new perspectives that a good written story with this formula would have. And it more often than not just leads to seeing the same plot points and cutscenes more times than you need, and the player ending up rolling their eyes all the damn time. I can appreciate Birth by Sleep for trying hard and going the distance, but it just doesn't make for a good game when the writing has completely fallen on its face this obviously. Birth by Sleep was actually the one game in the series of like 10 games that I played that I actually totally gave up on finishing because its typical Square Enix difficulty curve ended with a super memorable final boss, with its difficulty scaled way up compared to the rest of the game, complete with its usual suite of painful abilities, and it was just too much for me. I obviously watched the ending cutscene to prepare this script because that was the only thing I missed out on. I gave up finishing Birth by Sleep halfway through the final boss right after the phase of the fight where you fight Terra Xehanort in town. The thing that really got to me by the end was that the final fight was so minutely designed to screw with you that Aqua's third combo flourish was constantly screwing me over in battle because that flourish lasts just a second too long and you end up being vulnerable to devastating combos by Terra Xehanort in that moment. And when I realized that was when I realized I needed to get out and move on to something else. Because if it's that little margin of error, then it just wasn't worth it. Overall, Birth by Sleep is a good game that is worth your time, but I'm gonna warn people to watch out for that final battle, because even by Kingdom Hearts standards and by Square Enix's standards, Terra Xehanort was a frickin' doozy. I'll put up a final score as always for you guys. And I'll wish you all out there a victory for gamers. Welcome to our fabulous takes on the Kingdom Hearts franchise that will be sure to screw over your mind as much as you think it will.